Okay, I'm just going to be going over the answers with a little explanation as to why it's the right answer, just to clear up any confusion that might exist. So, for question 1, the idea behind this question first is whether or not different things or different formats impact test-retest reliability. In other words, the consistency at which someone will perform while taking the exact same test on two different occasions. Uh, Also, there's no opportunity for learning in between those. This is that idea of stability or test-retest reliability that we talked about earlier in the year. Now, when you're looking at these, you have 3 selected response options, and then there's 1 constructed response option. The biggest thing that impacts test-retest reliability in this context is really the impact that guessing has on how well you're going to do. And if we think of each of these options as having a different guessing parameter or a different guessing effect, short answers are least likely to be affected by guessing because you really have a 1 in 50 or 100 or even a million if you don't know the answer chance of getting it right. And then you have these other selected choice options. Matching probably has the lowest, depending on how it's constructed, but could potentially have the lowest. Multiple choice, you have a 1 in 4 chance, and true and false, you have a 50-50 chance of every answer. So thus, true and false is most impacted by guessing, which then has the largest effect on test-retest reliability. So this will give you the lowest consistency in results, really based on the idea that if people don't know the answers, they just really won't get it right. Question 2. Which of the following issues has the greatest impact on inter-rater reliability? Because inter-rater reliability talks about the difference between raters, the bias in those raters is going to be the biggest source of difference in how they score things. Validity of the questions really doesn't have to impact consistency of ratings at all. Clues in the questions is also a validity issue, and guessing is a reliability issue, but not in the grading of the exams. The next question, what type of reliability is most at issue with selected response items? It is this idea of test-retest reliability, another aspect of question 1. Intra-rater reliability and inter-rater reliability do not really impact selected response items because you have choices that are either correct or incorrect. And so the rater doesn't really have to do anything except decide whether or not they put an A and it was an A. So the only consistency that would really come up is interpreting ambiguous letters or answers as they are written. Standard error of measurement is a form of test-retest reliability, but test-retest reliability is actually the better answer in this case. Question 4, which is a primary benefit of constructed response questions? They do not eliminate the need for rubrics. They do not lessen the likelihood that spelling will be an issue. They are less reliable than selected response questions. And so D, that they are typically better suited to look at higher level learning outcomes, is the only answer that really works. And it is true. When we think of higher level learning outcomes, we're thinking of essays and performance assessments and things like that, because what we have to represent, what we have to get information on in our students is how they represent things in their own mind. Question 5, the whole Bobby Brown thing. The idea here is that he has level 3 goals, but he has a level 2 assessment. Now, his students could do well on those things, but the correct answer is D, that they may do well on them, but it does not mean that they have met the goals. If I want you to be able to synthesize a bunch of information about communities, populations, and whatnot, it's one thing if you memorize the answers or the definitions, another thing if you really understand and can apply those definitions, but it requires even more for you to synthesize and evaluate things about those concepts. Okay, question 6 is similar to question 5. It's the same idea, only asked a different way. We have this whole schedulification test, and the idea is that he had a very low-level goal, just a level 1 of memorization, but then he assessed them with a level 3 assessment. Now, just because they did not meet the demands of the assessment does not mean that he did not, or that they did not meet his goal. C is a commonly chosen option, but the one thing that's wrong with C is that you may think his goals were unreasonable, but that does not make the assessment unreliable. It just makes it invalid, and in this case it was very reliable, likely, in the fact that everyone failed it, and if they took it the next day they would fail it again. So that's why C is not really a good option. Question 7, under which set of circumstances would Dr. Phil benefit most from giving his patients true-false tests? The only time really true-false tests come in really handy are when you have a lot of different topics to cover, and so people have a lot of different questions or information bits to be assessed on, and true-false is really the quickest way to go through all those things, because you just have to read one statement and make a judgment about it. If you had a multiple choice question, you have to read a statement and then choose between 4 options, and reading those options takes a while. Same with matching, you have to go through all the options, short answer you have to write even though it's a single word, and so on. Restricted essays and performance assessments obviously take way longer. So C is the best option, really the only good option in that case. Question 8. This is pretty straightforward, straight out of the text. Disadvantages of portfolios is that people choose different things to put in them, and because if students are involved in the selection process, you are going to have to develop a bunch of different scoring criteria. You'll have some general things, but there will be some specific things, and you'll have to try to fit square pegs into round holes sometimes. You're going to have to spend a lot of extra time dealing with that. It lowers reliability as well, but yeah, it's a good trade-off in some cases. Question 9. C is the right answer because holistic rubrics just demand that you really read everything through once, and then you get a good idea of where their grade should be. Now, they're less reliable than analytic rubrics, but you don't have to go through and count spelling mistakes or errors. You don't have to count how many things were mentioned and whether those things mentioned were valid or not. All that stuff just happens once. And it's usually done with one read-through. If I was grading based on content and spelling, I would probably have to read it twice, once to count how many ideas were in there and which ones were relevant, and the second time to get a good count of grammar mistakes. So right there, I'm really doubling my time. In practice, holistic rubrics are a much more efficient way to grade summative essays and performance assessments. But if you are using the rubric to give feedback to the students, analytic rubrics are really good at giving detailed feedback and really good at spelling out exactly what is needed for a particular grade. Question 10, little Boy Meets World reference here. A is the answer because we don't know if Topanga is like that, if Topanga's the teacher, that is. If she's like that to everyone, if she's just like that because to Corey because Corey's a good math student, or if Corey just gets a +1 in everything. And the difference between these three is the Santa Claus bias really exists mostly in the person giving the grades, and they are just overly generous. The second one that's a little less general is the halo effect, and that applies to a single person, but it applies to everything that they do. The logical error of generalization applies to the single person, but it only gives them the benefit of the doubt in a particular domain. So if they're really cooperative or something like that, then if there's a dispute about sharing or who started what, they're more likely to be believed, even though they may be the one who started it because of this error of generalization. Well, they're always conscientious of other people, so therefore they are most likely the ones who did not start it. Likewise, if you have a really good social studies student and they turn in an essay that's just basically crap, you might read into what they're saying. Well, they wrote this, but I know that they know it and they probably meant this, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, which in case they may not know it. You're just making this generalization error and lowering the reliability and validity of your grading because of that. Question 11, straight out of the text, does not, I think, need a lot of explanation, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. If you have questions, send me an email. And then 12, which of the following statements is true regarding the advantages of portfolios over testing? Portfolios, the big thing is that they do get at process and achievement, and traditional testing, when you're looking at single assessments, do not. Again, you will have an option to do something like this on the exam, so I would suggest taking advantage of it. You don't have to write anything, but if you want to, it's an easy way to get a few extra points. The next couple sections will be going through these different critiques. Now, taking it at home, you do have an advantage doing the online format where you will be able to really look at your rules. However, there will be the time limit on this assessment, so I really do stress that you get these rules to be pretty automatic so you're not paging through or trying to remember what they mean and things like that. You'll also need the science packet that we've been looking at about communities, population, succession, and conservation. All the content is based on that. So the first thing you'll have to do is kind of go through and look at the answers, determine whether they're true or false, and then one by one go through each question and say what's wrong with it. Now, I don't think I need to give a lot of explanation about this stuff, other than for the set of items as a whole, the big things to look at are, are the directions clear and concise in each case? For true and false, do I have a good balance of true and false, or do I have all false or all true? That's a problem. With multiple choice, it would be, are all the answers B or C, or is there a pattern in the answer? If it's 4, does it go A, B, C, D? In which case, that might be a clue if that's something that you consistently do. You could also say that the true statements are a little longer than the false in this case when I'm looking at the items as a whole. And again, having one true item be longer than anything else is fine. It's okay. You're going to have statements be different lengths. It's only a problem if it's a systematic difference, if true statements are always longer than false statements. And in this case, you could argue that they are, although this number 1 is kind of between 2 and 5, and then 3 and 4, so it's kind of halfway between, but still, you could say that. Now, the way that these will be scored as well is you'll get 1 point for each correct mistake, or each mistake that you correctly identify, but you also potentially lose half a point when you say something incorrect. Not necessarily something that I didn't intend, or if you get really nitpicky about these things, you start picking things apart at a super high level. I don't take any points off for that, but those will largely be based on opinion. If you said something like this, if you said there should be an equal number of true and false, well, with an odd number that's impossible, so that would be something that I would say is not correct. If you said that these items aren't homogeneous, I would take off a half a point, because the homogeneity of items only applies to matching. Doesn't apply to true-false, doesn't apply to multiple choice, doesn't apply to short answer, and so on. So keep that in mind as you're going through. Don't just write down everything, because if you say things that aren't true or are incorrect, then that will negatively impact you. As well it should, because it's the assessment's supposed to evidence that you don't know something, then the assessment score should reflect that. So anyway, moving on. I have total confidence in your ability to do well. Directions here, same idea. Go through each item, critique it, see if anything is wrong. Some people might say that symbiosis is a clue here. It's not really a clue because you have to know that symbiosis is a form, or each of these is a form of symbiosis. Succession here and here is a clue because I'm describing a type of a succession, and then I have these two options, so it obviously gives it away that these two are these. And even if I didn't know anything, I would be more likely to guess here, and then that leaves these three down here. So I am jacking up my guessing parameter. Other than that, there's nothing really wrong with the items by themselves. Items as a whole, though, you have basically every problem that there could be. And actually, let me change this. This should be also directions are unclear. Oops. And they're unclear in that they don't talk about the nature of the relationship on which things should be matched, but they also are just kind of confusing. So you could point both those things out. With matching, there will be a lot of the problems in the items as a whole. Being a homogeneous list, that's items as a whole. Having the shorter things on the right, that you could say that about each item, but it is more a thing as a whole. I wouldn't take off if you put it in each item because it is true for each item. Talking about the pattern of responses, that's a thing as a whole. Having more responses than premises, that's a thing as a whole, and so on. But I don't think that we need to talk about that any longer. So we'll move on. I think that the matching section is also pretty self-explanatory, so I won't spend any more time on that. Just make sure that you're careful about recognizing the knots or the double negatives if they exist. In the matching, there's only that one. And be careful of tenses and things that don't really impact things the correct way either. If we go to short answer, same idea. The two open-ended is the idea that, again, that short answer questions should be concise in the responses that they elicit from the test takers. Be sure you're careful of the clues here, or tense clues. Is there anything else that is going to give things away? If we move on to essays, the idea will be I will give you a description here of something. I'll give you the assessment questions. I may talk a little bit about his grading or her grading procedure, and then there may or may not be some kind of rubric that is serving as a scoring guide. When you look at questions and directions, in all cases, in every set, you should be looking for bias, not just as an overall thing, but within each question. It's kind of like the directions thing. You should always be looking at the directions. Bias is something you're always looking for. And then it comes down to thinking about those rules. And there's quite a few rules for the essays because you not only have to follow the rules for essay creation, but also for rubric development and scoring, and then of course those general rules about syntax and vocab and things like that. But otherwise, I don't think that I need to spend any more time on this, but if you have any questions, please let me know. But I think it's pretty straightforward. And then there will be some short answer, restricted essay, maybe even an extended essay question, but nothing terribly long because of the time limit. I can talk about each of these a little bit, but I think the answers themselves kind of explain what I mean. For this section, it'll mostly be on performance assessments and portfolio questions. There may be some lower level stuff in there, but there will probably be some higher level stuff in there too. Like, for instance, the trade-off between validity and reliability when using performance assessments. The idea, and there's a lot of different ways you could say this. The idea being that the quality of information I get about whether or not I have really prepared my students to apply knowledge in a real-world setting or synthesize different ideas and create things and do really more valid tasks is the big benefit of performance assessments. It's the idea of, if I'm trying to teach somebody how to create a PowerPoint presentation, I can go over a bunch of criteria, a bunch of list of things that they should do about formatting and headings and the amount of content and the use of tables and the use of animation and all this other stuff. And I can give them a paper pencil test on all those rules, but it's much better if I have them actually create a PowerPoint presentation, right? And then evaluate what they make, because how you do things and what exactly you put into a PowerPoint presentation really depends on the audience and the content and all sorts of things. So you have this higher quality of information. However, you sacrifice reliability because, first, usually there are no right or wrong answers. And so I'm using subjective judgments based on criteria that I have defined. Nothing's explicitly right or wrong. And then you also have a greater variation typically in student responses. If you are using performance assessments well, you are giving some latitude into how a task is going to be completed. If you spell it out, you're kind of defeating yourself and reducing it to just a checklist of level 1 or 2 items. So you're going to sacrifice reliability or with the benefit of increasing validity in terms of what you really want your students to be able to do. So if you have any questions on this idea, let me know. Obviously that same question won't be on the exam, but these are just examples of things that I'd like you to know. And these ideas might come up, say, in the multiple choice section. So, think about these things. The authenticity and generalizability bit, in the performance assessment chapter, there are those 7 criteria plus significance that Popham describes in the text and I have in the notes. Spend some time looking at those. I guarantee there'll be some questions on that stuff, asking you to relate some of those ideas to one another. When we talk about portfolios, I think the portfolio idea is pretty simple, but I do want you to understand, just like performance assessments, how does portfolios impact the validity of the inferences that you can make, the reliability, the comprehensiveness, how they're used, and are the things that you lose made up for by the things that you gain? One of the big things being this student self-evaluation, which is super important, trying to get people to reflect and evaluate their own work rather than just trying to meet the rubric, as Alfie Kohn says, that a teacher provides. Trying to internalize that kind of assessment process, because you really don't do things well unless you are constantly reflecting and revising and making things better, and knowing that you should be doing that is kind of important to that process. This is basically really just a level 1/2 thing, just asking for each one of these things that could be easily memorized. I do want you to think about each term, like he talks about these different types of rubrics and their specific pros and cons. In the same sense, when you talk about like these 3 sources of error that he talks about, make sure you understand what the different personal biases are, how they're different from things like the halo effect and logical errors of generalization. Think about scoring procedures. He gives some specific criteria in there, and really think about how it impacts reliability. But that's the basic format of this thing. You'll have an hour and a half to do it. It'll be pretty much the same as the one that the people in class get, although there will be some differences. Your questions might require a little more level 2, level 3 stuff in some cases, just because, I can't police notes, and so am I saying that you can use notes? I guess so, in that sense, but because of the time limit, I wouldn't recommend not studying for it, because that's never a good idea. If you have any questions, let me know. This will be posted on Wednesday, April 11th, and it will be open through the following Monday, April 16th. Closing at midnight on Monday. Any questions? Send me an email.